Greetings students, I'm Albert Inchinali and welcome to another exciting CSEC Social Studies lesson. Have you been enjoying the lessons thus far? Well, I most certainly hope so. Now for today's lesson, we will be talking about social groups. This is our introductory lesson for social groups, another topic as it relates to the individual and society. Now, I have a quote for you, and that quote is from John Donne, and it says, "No man is an island. No man is an island." What do you think that means? Yes, it means that we're social beings, we're social creatures. Even though sometimes you like spending time alone, you like being in solitude, by nature, as a human being, you're social. That is why it must be so difficult for some of you to be home all the time right now during the pandemic. You may be missing your friends, missing interacting with others, because no man is an island. Now, our objectives for today. At the end of the lesson, you should be able to define the term social group, identify characteristics of many groups, differentiate between formal and informal groups, and differentiate between primary and secondary groups. Now, I'm sure you would like to know, what is a social group? A social group is formed when two or more people come together repeatedly. There must be some level of permanence and a shared purpose. Group members usually also have some characteristics in common. Now students, I want us to understand that not every gathering of people with similar characteristics is a social group. For example, when you go to the Guyana National Stadium to see the Guyana Amazon Warriors play, you would realize that you're amongst people. But guess what? You are not part of a social group there. All those people and you have similar characteristics or interests. You all love cricket, but you're not part of a social group. Why? Chances are you don't know everybody that's there, and you're only there on a temporary basis. You don't know these people, there's no sense of permanence. So we can say you are not part of a social group, but rather everyone who attends the match is part of a social category or classification. Another example could be expectant mothers waiting at a doctor's office. They're all there at the same place at the same time. They have something in common, but we will not say they're part of a social group because these mothers do not meet regularly and they're not always there at the same time. So that's a social category and not a social group. Now, if the doctor wants to start a parenting group and have these women come to that group every week or once a month and they meet together, then that would be a social group. Now that we've defined what a social group is, let us look at the characteristics of groups. An organized group will often have at least some of the following characteristics. The first one, regular meetings. Members of social groups meet and interact frequently. This is the reason for the existence of groups. Think about it. Why do we have a group if we're not going to meet regularly? You meet, you interact, and you satisfy a basic need or desire. And it is not necessary to meet face to face. Especially now, during a pandemic, we have groups that meet online, they meet virtually. You're part of a class, your class may be meeting online. It doesn't make it any less of a group. Now, groups also have a structure, and this is usually more so in formal groups. In social groups, there is usually some level of organization. Like I said, although it is much more evident in formal than informal groups. Informal groups, the structure is even written into the group's bylaws or rules. For example, your school is a formal group because there are rules there, there are regulations there, there's a structure there. Even some informal groups have a structure. Think about it. Your friends make up a group. You don't have written rules or laws or regulations, yet the teacher of the class could say, so-and-so is the ringleader of the group. Your teacher may ask, who is the ringleader of this group? Because everybody knows that maybe or usually there's somebody that takes in charge, even though the group is not a formal group. Now, all groups have goals, or at least a particular result or achievement towards which they are striving. The goals of some groups may be clearer than others, and some may be more complicated than others. In informal groups, the goal may be as simple as finding a place to play cricket until sunset. Think about it. Your friends are part of a group. You're part of a group with your friends, and you're looking for an activity to do after school. It may be where to go and get some ice cream, where to play a game of cricket. That could be a very simple goal. Some groups have more complicated goals. A group may want to eradicate poverty. They may want to solve the problem of homelessness in a particular city. All groups usually have goals, whether they're simple or complicated. Now, another characteristic of groups have to do with membership. Yes, memberships in groups may be voluntary or involuntary. That is, we choose to join some groups, but we find ourselves in other groups not of our choosing. Now, think about it. You are part of a family. Did you choose your family? No, you did not. Chances are you did not choose your family if you're not adopted. And even in some cases with adoption, you don't necessarily choose your family. That is an example of being part of a group which you did not volunteer for. You're part of the group involuntarily, right? So that has to do with membership of groups. Speaking of membership, some groups are more exclusive than others. Groups may not be open to everyone. For example, you have some men groups or some women groups, or you may have a group for senior citizens. These groups are very exclusive. Some groups accept any and everybody, and some groups are more limited to a particular type or people that have certain characteristics. Now, why do you think some groups have membership requirements? It could be to prevent persons from joining the group who are just there to cause problems or troubles. That is why you may find that if you can't play cricket well, you may not be allowed to join a cricket team. If you are not a female, you may not be allowed to join a men's group because maybe, there's no interest there for you. So groups definitely have membership requirements so that the group members can stay focused on achieving a particular goal that they may have. Now, another characteristic of groups have to do with common symbols or marks of identity. These are very important in group identification. They also give group members a sense of pride and belonging. When you wear your school's uniform, I'm sure you feel very proud because you are representing your school and you're glad to be representing a reputable institution. You're glad to be wearing or donning certain marks of identity. It's very important in groups. There are some groups, however, that prefer to be anonymous and encourage members to hide their membership. In these cases, identifying symbols may only be known to group members. Probably a group like a cult or a group that is known for criminal activities. They may not want to have symbols or marks of identity that are easily recognizable. Now, another characteristic of social groups have to do with common needs, interests, and values. Groups are formed and exist because people feel a need for them. Members tend to gravitate towards those groups because they serve some purpose in their lives, even if this is simply to make friends. So maybe after school, you do an extracurricular activity, you're part of a group, maybe a photography club, maybe you're part of the Boy Scouts. You have an interest in the activities that are provided by the group. And you meet friends because you all share similar interests. It is also imperative for us to understand that social groups have rules and regulations. These determine the way group members interact and how the group pursues its goals. Rules also outline the sanctions. And when I say sanctions, I mean rewards and punishments to be used when rules are kept or broken. Rules may or may not be written down. If it is a formal group, then these rules and regulations are usually written down. Think about your class rules. Your school may have a booklet with all the rules that students must follow. That's because this school is a formal group. Now, if you and your friends are part of a group, which is an informal group, you may not have rules that are written down, more than likely. But yet, if one of your friends disrespects you, if one of your friends spreads a rumor about you and someone else, chances are you may not like that, and that person may be expelled from the group if other members within the group felt like that friend violated the codes and the unwritten rules that make the group what it is. Now, apart from rules and regulations, social groups also have established patterns of behavior. Many social groups serve the purpose of promoting socially acceptable behavior. This may be by teaching and demonstrating the behavior which is required within the group. Think about it, your family, even though there may be no written rules and regulations, there's still established ways of how you should behave. I'm sure you don't get the freedom to go out as you please and come in as you please. Perhaps you're taught to always have good manners, take care of the elders in your family and so forth. These have to do with established patterns of behavior. Similarly, a school has established patterns of behavior because we want to get you to behave in a socially acceptable way. It is also very important for us to know that those characteristics we just discussed are not as evident in informal groups as they are in formal groups. For example, while the Scouts may have all of these characteristics discussed, a group of children who play together after school may not have fixed rules. They may change their rules every day. They may also change their purpose of the group every day. Today we meet because we want to play cricket. Tomorrow we are meeting because we want to decide where we're going to go after school. So informal groups don't have these strict rules and regulations and may not meet as often as well. Now students, even though I've mentioned what are some characteristics of formal groups and informal groups, it is time for us to differentiate between the two more in depth. Now, formal groups have written rules and sanctions, criteria for membership, and a clear organizational structure with an elected or appointed leadership and specific goals. Now, informal groups are much more relaxed. Membership and goals may vary as there are no set criteria. There is no stated organizational structure, and activities may vary from one day or hour to the next. Can you think of some examples of formal groups? Yes, your school as an educational institution is a formal group. There's criteria for membership. Not everybody could attend your school. Adults don't attend your school unless they're part of the staff. The school also have fixed rules, sanctions, and so forth. If you misbehave, there's punishment. If you do well, there are rewards. So the school is an example of a formal group. The congregation of a church is also an example of a formal group because the church as a religious institution has a leader. The temple has a leader. The mosque has a leader. So these are all examples of formal groups. Now, when we talk about informal groups, it could be a group of friends meeting after school, a group of friends meeting during the lunch period. It could also be a group of employees from different departments meeting for lunch. That could be an informal group as well. It could be boys liming by the street corner every afternoon. That is an informal group because there is no clear goal or purpose that you plan to achieve, and membership is more relaxed. Anybody could join an informal group for the most part. Now that we've been able to differentiate between formal and informal groups, I think it's very important for us to understand the difference between primary versus secondary groups. Now, the important factors in determining whether a group is a primary group or a secondary group are the size of the group. Primary groups are generally smaller. Secondary groups tend to be larger. Also, determining whether a group is primary or secondary depends on whether members see each other on a regular basis. Now, if they see each other on a regular basis, this usually happens in primary groups. In secondary groups, members may be in totally different locations and never meet face to face. Now, another criteria for differentiating between primary and secondary groups has to do with the level of intimacy which the members share. In a primary group, the relationship between members is close and friendly. There's a bond, there's a connection. You know each other really well. While in a secondary group, it tends to be impersonal and formal. Since we've differentiated between primary and secondary groups, could you tell me some examples of primary and secondary groups? Would your class be a primary or a secondary group? Think about your class. How many students are in your class? Probably approximately 30 students. That's not pretty large compared to some groups. So we could say your class is pretty small. Do you see each other on a regular basis, whether in person or virtually? Yes. So if you see each other on a regular basis, that's another criteria to determine whether your class is a primary group or a secondary group. Do you know each other very well? Are you friends? Is there intimacy there? Is there a connection? Is there a bond? Yes, more than likely there is. So based on these three criteria, we can say that the class is an example of a primary group. Also, the family is an example of a primary group. Now let's talk about a school. Would school be an example of a primary group? Usually schools have hundreds of children, if not thousands of children. So a school would be that the members make a large number. They amount to a large number. And usually you don't know everybody that's part of your school population. So definitely we can categorize the school as being part of a secondary group, while a class is an example of a primary group. The family is also an example of a primary group. Now, it can be said that all informal groups are primary groups. Why do you think that is? Because the characteristics are pretty similar. For example, an informal group, such as a group of friends, would be a primary group because you know each other intimately, you meet on a regular basis, and usually your group is very small. Even though we say all informal groups are primary groups, all primary groups are not informal groups because your class, it is a primary group. They are a small number of students, approximately 30. You meet on a regular basis. You know each other intimately, but there are written rules and regulations. Your class is not an informal group. You have a form teacher. You may have a class prefect. You have an organizational structure. So, all informal groups are primary groups, but not all primary groups are informal groups. Are some of you part of cliques? Do you have your own squad? Do you have your own small group of friends within your classroom? Now, what is a clique? A clique really is a more exclusive group of friends. It's a smaller informal group that is found within another group. A clique is a primary group and allows members the type of intimacy they may not find in the group as a whole. And I'm sure that happens at school, in your class, which is a primary group. Even though there are 30 of you there, some of you have closer relations. You connect better with each other. You're more friendly with some than the others. That could be an example of a clique. You may probably sit together at lunch. You leave school at the same time. You share ideas together when you work on assignments because you tend to be in the same groups. That's an example of a clique. Now, apart from categorizing social groups as primary, secondary, formal, and informal, we could also talk about different classifications. For example, peer group. Who is your peer? Yes, your peer is usually someone who is of the same age as you and have similar interests. Now, the peer group is an example of a primary group. It is made up of people of similar age and/or social circumstance. Members of peer groups tend to develop intimate relationships. They are important for teenagers who often gain an identity from the peer group they associate with. Teenagers may also experience peer pressure within these groups. And mind you, peer pressure is not only negative, it could be positive as well. So if you're part of a peer group, your friends could influence you positively. Maybe you're disrupting the class. Maybe you're the class clown. Maybe you like making jokes while the teacher is teaching. Your friends may be like, stop it, pull up yourself, pay attention. Or maybe you didn't do so well on a test and your friends are annoyed with you and they want to help you study. So there are definitely positive effects of being part of a peer group. Similarly, there are negative effects of a peer group. Perhaps your friends may want to lead you astray. Perhaps they engage in drugs. Perhaps they don't study. Perhaps they defy authority. But you, as a person in the group, must be conscious when you make certain decisions and decide and know for yourselves whether you are being impacted positively or negatively within your peer group. Another classification of social group has to do with the interest group. As the name suggests or implies, it has to do with people who have a common interest. But don't be fooled. The interest group is more than members having a common interest. It's a formal grouping of people with a specific common interest who seek to increase their influence or effect change that will benefit them and others. Think about it. There are some persons who are very passionate about some social issues. They may want to help to eradicate poverty. They may be aligning themselves with the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement. These people are part of an interest group because they would like to see certain changes in society. So it's not that they just have certain things in common, it's that they want to effect change. On the political level, interest groups pressurize or lobby the legislature and government agencies in order to influence public policy or campaign to change public opinion. In this context, these interest groups are known as pressure groups because guess what? They pressurize the government or they lobby the legislature and government agencies. Now, for example, people with disabilities may form a pressure group to persuade government to pass legislation to make all public places wheelchair accessible. That's an example of a pressure group. Speaking of pressure groups, it's time for me to turn on the pressure on you. And I'll do that by giving you some multiple choice questions that I most certainly hope you'll get correct. The first multiple choice question is, the best definition of a social group is it A, two or more persons together? Is it B, two or more persons who meet and interact with each other on a regular basis to achieve a common goal? Is it C, two or more persons who meet sometimes to achieve a common goal? Or is it D, an audience in a theater? Which do you think is the best definition of a social group? Is it A, two or more persons together? If you're standing by the bus stop and somebody stands next to you, are you part of a social group? Of course not. If you're in an audience in a theater and you're seeing people who you don't even know and chances are you'll never see them again, are you part of a social group there? Of course not. You're part of a social category. Is it two or more persons who meet sometimes to achieve a common goal? Sometimes may suggest very seldom. You meet seldomly, right? So no, the best answer there would be B, two or more persons who meet and interact with each other on a regular basis to achieve a common goal. My second question for you is, groups can be classified by all of the following except A, emotional maturity of its members, B, size, small, medium, large, C, structure, D, nature of the relationship among group members. Which do you think is the answer? We can classify groups by all of the following criteria, using all of the following criteria, except which one? Did we classify groups based on structure? Yes, we said some groups have written rules and regulations, some do not. That means some groups are formal, some are informal. Did we classify groups based on the nature of the relationship among group members? Yes, we did. We said in primary groups, usually the members know each other intimately. There's some connection there. In secondary groups, they do not know everyone intimately, if at all. Did we mention the size of the groups? Yes, we did mention the size of the groups. Smaller groups tend to be primary groups. Larger groups tend to be secondary groups. Do we classify people based on their emotional maturity of the members? No, we do not. That is why in a classroom, you may find some students who are more emotionally mature than others, because we don't tend to classify groups based on emotional maturity of its members. Now, if you did not get those 2 questions correct, I hope the third time is the charm. Our third question is, which of the following can be classified as primary groups? Is it A, political parties, a family, trade unions? Is it B, a class within a school, a family, a small church choir? Is it C, trade unions, a class within a school, a family? Is it D, a small church choir, the police service, a family? Which of the following can be classified as primary groups? Let's look at A, political parties, a family, trade unions. Political parties usually have many members. There are many people who may be affiliated with a political party, and you don't necessarily interact with all of them. A family is very small. Usually, even though it's an extended family, we can still categorize it as a primary group because you meet with the members regularly, you connect with them, you bond with them. So we can say a family is a primary group, but a political party is not the primary group. Is a trade union a primary group? Trade unions usually represent workers in a given field. So you may have a trade union that represents teachers, or a trade union that represents those who work in the sugar industry. Of course, trade unions may represent thousands of people. So we will not consider a trade union or a political party as a primary group. So look at the other options. If you see trade union or political parties in the other options, we'll eliminate those as well. So I can notice that trade unions is part of the answer for C. So both A and C we will eliminate. Now let us look at B and D. B talks about a class within a school. Is that the primary group? Yes, because there's approximately 30 students who know each other very well. They meet regularly as well. Family, we already established that that's a primary group. What about a small church choir? Maybe the church choir has 10 to 20 members. It's small, so we will say it is a primary group. So B has all categories of primary groups, so I would go with B. But not just yet. Look at D. D has a small church choir, police service, and a family. And let's talk about the police service. The Guyana Police Service has many members, thousands of members, so we will not consider it to be a primary group. Therefore, our answer is B. I'm so happy that you got all correct if you did. If you did not, please remember to study your notes, look at this video as often as you need to, and try to improve where you feel that there's need for improvement. I am Mr. Inshanali, and this is CSEC Social Studies. Until next time, do take care.